It is time for everyone to stop treating music production like it's a business. And no, I do not mean that you should stop treating being a music producer like it's your business, because it probably is. If you want to make money selling production services, then you will need to do things like market yourself, pay taxes, all that type of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. So what I am talking about is something much worse that I have been seeing more and more people doing and talking about as time goes on, and that is treating the actual music production process like it's a business. Confused? Yeah, I figured, but I can explain. So let's talk about why you need to stop treating music production like a business. So, something that I've noticed is that the business influencer world, the self-help universe, and the music business have intersected in a way that really rubs me the wrong way. It's like a really bad version of the Avengers. So there are these books like The 4-Hour Workweek or E-Myth Revisited, and there are also internet business guru types that you might come across like Gary Vee, Ali Abdaal. Really, choose your fighter. So anyway, most of these books and people are teaching principles of building a good business. And while I can't say that they're all great ideas, I get where they're coming from. So things like the 80-20 principle or the Pareto principle, Parkinson's law, all of these delegation tactics that they teach to help you scale your business, these business tips are not necessarily bad ideas, but I am so tired of seeing producers try and implement them in a dogmatic way, in a way that really puts the music in the back seat, and I am even more tired of music production content creators who are looking to become business gurus themselves, trying to twist these principles that they've read about into production advice that they've never followed themselves. So, the first business principle that I want producers, engineers, musicians to stop using, or I guess I should say stop misusing, is the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto principle. So this is the idea that 80% of your successes will come from 20% of your efforts, while 80% of your headaches will come from 20% of your problems. So in a business, the idea is that 20% of your highest paying clients will probably cover around 80% of your profits, and 20% of your ideas or products will probably lead to 80% of your successes. Meanwhile, 20% of your problem clients will create about 80% of the fires that you have to put out every day, and 20% of your procedures that are the most inefficient will lead to 80% of your slowdowns. Now, for some reason, the takeaway that a lot of producers are getting from this principle, it blows my mind. So apparently, if you're not sure about something or you're stuck on it, you're supposed to just say, 80-20, and then move on. The thing that you're stuck on is probably, hopefully, part of that 80% of ideas that don't really matter to like your success, because as long as the 20% that are correct are there, the song will be a hit, right? And if it's not easy, we just call it a headache and eliminate it. Now, I've been in session after session lately where a musician or producer basically says just coin flip some important decision, because that's an 80-20 thing. But these headaches that we're supposedly supposed to be eliminating, they're things like spending time refining lyrics, finding the right kick and snare sample for the song, putting effort into getting the perfect vocal take. I wish these weren't real examples that I've seen, by the way, but anyway, these are not the headaches that you should be just glossing over. So what are the 80-20 headaches that I think you should be eliminating? Well, how about wiring up your studio properly and organizing everything so you don't have to go hunting for a headphone adapter or spend an hour moving things around just to patch in someone else's keyboard? What about getting your taxes done by a professional so you don't have to stress about it every April? What about getting a snake and leaving your mics plugged into it so you don't have to set up from scratch every time you want to track drums? Or maybe getting good systems in place for communicating with clients, so you don't have to dig through tons of texts and emails just to find the message where your mix notes are. Having backups of everything and saving a new version before you go making big changes. These are the types of headaches that you need to be eliminating. So when it's time to buckle in and really push for quality in the studio, in your actual sessions, you aren't suffering from these avoidable headaches. So similar to the Pareto principle, Parkinson's law is another business principle that producers love to twist and apply to music production, when in reality, it mostly belongs in the back end of your production business. So this law states that work expands to fill the time you give it. Pretty simple. But that basically means that according to some producers, if you give yourself a challenge and come up with lots of self-imposed deadlines, apparently you will always get it all done in time and you'll just become the most prolific producer of all time. Because if you can spend 20 hours producing a song, but you could do it in 10, why aren't you? And YouTube is littered with challenge videos from these producers, myself included. I made one once. So can you make a song in a day? What about in an hour? Could you make a whole album in a week? Stuff like that. And it does prove something. Yes, you can do it if you have to. But frankly, there are some things at play with these challenge type things that I think often get overlooked. So for one, writing a song in one day, that's just a songwriting session. I've done a zillion of them. You sit down with an artist, put some coffee on, and by the time they're ready to leave, you've got a song written. That's just being a songwriter. But even if it is impressive to write a great song in a short period of time, there's more that happens after that great song is finished being written. You can make some tweaks here and there, polish up the production just a bit, then cut a proper vocal and give it a half-decent mix, and then decide if it's worth releasing. These I gave myself one day to write and produce and record and mix 5 whole songs type challenges skip a few of those steps. Yes, it's neat that you pulled it off, and in the context of the challenge, you can often do a good job. But every time I've done a challenge like this or had to run up against a deadline that's a little bit too unrealistic, there are going to be corners that are cut and you miss out on the chance to really sit with the work, pick the best ideas that you connect with the most, and put your attention into those. So really, these Parkinson's law type production methods remind me of something from the visual art world that I think more producers should be stealing, and that is a technique called an art study. So a study is when you draw something quickly with the goal of learning to draw that specific shape or object, or to improve at a certain technique. So the artist will sit down and just say practice drawing birds for a few hours, not with the intent of making a finished piece, but to learn the motion, the curves, the shape. You wouldn't submit a study to an art show, but the effects of it would be seen in your actual work. And if you do end up making something really nice, then you can use it in an actual piece. The same way, I think more producers should do things like 1-hour studies. Sit down with a timer and see what you could cook up in an hour. Could you make 10 really cool drum loops? Or write chorus vocal parts for an hour every day for 2 weeks? Improve at arranging by spending an hour just doing that. How much would you grow as a producer if you did studies every day to level up? And then when you've made your sketches, done your studies, use those as grab and go parts for real productions when the time comes. The songwriting challenges, the song a day stuff, this has utility for sure, but to me, that utility is in proving to yourself that you can still do it. If you're stuck, you're spinning your wheels, and confidence is at an all-time low. Doing some songwriting challenges and knocking out a few slump busters is a great way to get back on the horse and remind yourself that you can actually write music. But even outside of the set a timer, Parkinson's law stuff, I think more producers should be applying it on a macro level. Yes, you can make 10 beats in one day if you really needed to, but can you make 10 of your best beats in 1 week? Can you get your client work done quickly because you made a real schedule for it? Can you reach out to 10 artists that you want to work with in 1 hour and do all of your admin stuff by the end of Tuesday? I think so, and I think that's the way that you should be approaching this principle. And zooming out a bit more, I think it's important to remember that time spent in your DAW is not wasted. Flipping through samples, messing around with patches and presets, following rabbit holes when you find them, and pulling on strings to see where they lead, these are things that will give you valuable experience as a producer. And trying to adhere to this arbitrary law is just going to pull you out of experimenting and finding what makes your production style unique. Don't let mix revisions take all day because you gave it a giant bucket to expand into. But don't stop spending time being creative in the interest of impressing some guy who named a rule after himself in 1955. Now, one thing that really freaks me out when I see production business influencers teaching it to young new producers is to delegate as much as possible. So the advice is that if you're looking to start making music for other people, you should outsource editing, vocal tuning, mix prep, all that kind of stuff as soon as you can. Then that will let you really grow your business and focus on the right things. I have heard so many producers give this advice and say that if they had a time machine, they'd go back and start offloading things much sooner. Now, I'll admit that I'm kind of a do-it-myself kind of person already, so delegating isn't in my nature. But some of the methods that people are teaching now are kind of blowing my mind. So for one, it's kind of wild to me that a new producer who is just getting started working with tiny budgets should even be thinking about splitting those tiny budgets up between themselves and other people. If you're just starting out, the reality is you're going to probably start working for less money than you should. Like the first songs I ever recorded, I think I charged like $100 a song. And the idea that you should try and get more money in the budget to then let other people get involved, well, it's fun and it gets people's brains turning and gets them thinking you're a great business mind, but it's just not realistic. When you're just starting out, it's also really important to learn every step of the process so you can figure out what you are good at. And I can't imagine spending time that you could be doing that, finding people to outsource things to, then doing quality checks, and then trying to juggle this team of freelancers. I just don't think that's a good use of time, especially for people starting out. Not to mention, nobody is going to work harder making sure that your first productions sound good than you are. And there is some value in outperforming a small budget for an artist and creating portfolio pieces that you actually made that sound great. So while lots of established pros are saying they regret not delegating sooner, I have yet to hear any who said the secret to their success was delegating everything as quickly as possible. Hindsight is 20/20, but it also isn't, because we're looking back at something that worked, and then we're saying it would have worked even more if I did it differently, which honestly just may not be true. And second, I feel really icky about more experienced people in the industry who are taking big budgets and then they're just delegating a huge majority of the project to underpaid freelancers. I've heard about artists spending like 4 figures to hire producers, sometimes 5 figures, who then basically go online and find people to play all the instruments for cheap, handle all the editing. Realistically, they're just project managing a bunch of other freelancers who are doing all the actual work. And then they're just putting their stamp on it at the end. And that's not to say that hiring session players, overseeing edits, and giving final approvals isn't producing, because that is a big part of it. But at the same time, I just feel like if you've basically created an automated funnel, like a system where an artist sends you the demo, and then the producer feeds it down the funnel to people like on Fiverr that are basically doing all the work and then sending the stuff the Fiverr people sent to a mixer, and then they just email that mix back to the artist without even opening a DAW. You're just kind of like roller skating through all your projects. Something about it doesn't feel right. Like, I don't know what that is, but it doesn't feel like being a music producer to me, especially if you're doing this to juggle like a dozen high-paid projects at a time. I guess if I had to explain my point with all of this in a way that you can easily remember, simply put, I just want us to start taking music production advice, like the actual art stuff, from actual music production sources again. And then the business advice we get, let's try and apply that to the business half of being a music producer, not the music producer half, if that makes sense. Basically, like, let Eric Valentine teach you how to produce the record, and let Gary Vee teach you how to run your Instagram. So after this, we're done treating music production like a business, right? Okay, good. And we're going to start embracing the 80% of the headaches that come with doing the work figuring out what's best for the art, and creating cool stuff with great people, of course. But if you need some advice on getting rid of the 20% of problems, the kind I actually want you to eliminate, then this video on digital decluttering has some ideas that might be what you're looking for.